And secondly, the Nairobi Work Programme Focal Point Forum, which kicked off work on mountains, high latitude areas, and the cryosphere. In concluding, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for the guidance you have provided to me and the SEPSTA. Special thanks also go to all parties for the hard work that enabled the SEPSTA to conclude its work successfully here in Dubai. I would also like to thank all co-chairs and co-facilitators for their dedicated and tireless support, as well as to the observer community for their important contribution to the SEPSTA. This concludes my report to the COP. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Harry. I invite Nabil Munir, Chair of the SBI, to introduce the report on the work of the SBI. Nabil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. It is my pleasure to report on the work conducted by subsidiary body on implementation at its 58th session held in Bonn and at its 59th session here in Dubai. The 59th session of the SBI closed on Wednesday, 6th December, after adopting conclusions, including recommendations for draft decisions. The report on SBI 58 is contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/10 and COR 1, and FCCC/SBI/2023/10/Add 1. The draft report on the 59th session is contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/L13. Mr. President, in addition to completing the work entrusted to the SBI and the large number of mandated events convened under the guidance of the SBI in June recommended the following COP decisions as contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/10/Add 1. The draft decision entitled Linkages between Technology Mechanism and the Financial Mechanism. The draft decision decisions entitled Terms of Reference for the second review of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, one of which was recommended to the COP with a view to the COP recommending it for consideration and adoption by the CMA. And the draft decision entitled Administrative, Financial and Institutional Matters, including the program budget for the biennium 2024-2025. Here in Dubai, in addition to the work captured in the decisions adopted on Wednesday, the SBI recommended the following draft decisions. 2 draft decisions recommended together with the SEPSTA to the appropriate body or bodies, pending the outcome of the President's consultations on the governance of the Warsaw International Mechanism. The draft decision entitled Matters Relating to the Santiago Network under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts, contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L17, on the selection of joint proposal submitted by the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and the United Nations Office for Project Services for hosting the Santiago Network Secretariat for an initial term of 5 years with 5-year renewal periods. In the draft decision contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L12 on the report of the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts. Also, with SEPSTA, the SBI recommended the draft decision contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L9 on the joint annual report of the Technology Executive Committee and the Climate Technology Center and Network, entitled Enhancing Climate Technology and Development and Transfer Through the Technology Mechanism. And on capacity building matters, the SBI recommended the draft decision contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/L18 on the annual technical progress report of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building for 2023. The SBI recommended a draft decision on gender and climate change contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/L17. And finally, the SBI recommended a draft decision contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L14, add 1, as orally amended by the SBI at its closing plenary on administrative, financial, and administrative matters. Mr. President, I would like to recommend that COP adopts the aforementioned draft COP decisions. I also note that despite the best efforts of parties to come to an agreed outcome on all items, the SPI could not complete its work and sought your further guidance on the matters relating to the forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures serving the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement, as per the joint SBI-SBSTA conclusions contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L16. I trust the parties will continue to engage constructively under your able guidance to reach agreement on those critical issues. Mr. President, allow me to thank you for your guidance at this session. I would also like to thank all co-chairs and co-facilitators for their dedication and tireless support. This concludes my report to COP. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Nabil, and allow me to use this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to Harry and Nabil for their dedication, hard work, and leadership in successfully guiding the work of the SBSTA and the SPI during this year. Under their stewardship, the subsidiary bodies have achieved ambitious outcomes that we will present for adoption by the governing bodies. I also wish to thank them both for their support of the presidency of ensuring the effective management and transition of the work for the subsidiary bodies to the governing bodies. I invite the COP to take note of the oral reports by the chairs, the draft report on the 59th session of the SBSTA contained in document FCCC/SBSTA SBSTA/2023/L.9 and the draft report on the 59th session of the SPI contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/L.13 and the report on the 58th session of the SBSTA contained in document FCCC/SBSTA/2023/4 and add 1 and the report on the 58th session of the SPI contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/10 and add 1 and core 1. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. Colleagues, the decisions recommended by the SBSTA and the SPI will be presented for adoption at our closing plenary. I will provide guidance on how we will proceed with the matters forwarded to the governing bodies by the chairs of SBSTA and SPI later this meeting. This meeting of the COP is suspended. I declare open the fourth meeting of the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. I invite the CMP to consider Agenda Item 3, Sub-Items A and B, reports of the subsidiary bodies, reports of the SBSTA, and report of the SPI. I invite Harry to introduce the report on the work of the SBSTA. Harry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure to report on the work conducted by the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice at its 58th and 59th session. The report on SBSTA 58 is contained in document FCCC/SBSTA/2023/4 and add 1. The draft report on the 59th session is contained in document FCC/2023/L9. Mr. President, despite the best effort of parties to come to an agreed outcome on all items, the SUBSTA could not complete its work and sought your further guidance on the following matters, which was conceded jointly with the SBI. Matters related to the Forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures serving the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, as per the joint SUBSTA SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L16. I trust that the parties will continue to engage constructively under your able guidance to reach agreement on these critical issues. Thank you, Mr. President, for the guidance you provided to me and the SUBSTA. I would also like to thank the co-chairs and all parties for their efforts. This concludes my report to the CMP. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Harry. I invite Nabil to introduce the report on the work of the SBI. Nabil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is now my pleasure to report on the work conducted by the subsidiary body on implementation at its 58th session held in Bonn and its 59th session held here in Dubai. The 59th session of SBI concluded on Wednesday, 6 December, after adopting conclusions, including recommendations for draft decisions. The report on SBI 58 is contained in FCC/SBI/2023/10 and Core 1, and FCC/SBI/2023/10 Add 1. The draft report of the 59th session is contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L13. Mr. President, in addition to completing the work entrusted to the SBI by the CMP and the large number of mandated events convened under the guidance of the SBI in June recommended the following CMP decisions contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/10/Add 1. The draft decision entitled Administrative, Financial and Institutional Matters, including the program budget for the biennium 2024-2025. And the draft decision entitled Budget for the International Transaction Log. Here in Dubai, in addition to the work captured in the conclusions adopted by SBI on Wednesday, the SBI recommended a draft CMP decision contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L14, Add 2, as orderly amended by the SBI at its closing plenary on administrative, financial and administrative matters. The SBI also recommended that CMP takes note of the information presented in 2023 report of the International Transaction Log Administrator, as contained in document FCC/KP/CMP/2023-2026. Mr. President, I would like to recommend that CMP 18 adopts the aforementioned draft CMP decisions and takes note of the information presented in the 2023 report of the International Transaction Log Administrator. The SBI would also recommend to the CMP 18 to consider the review of the status of trust fund for the clean development mechanism under CMP 18, draft agenda on matters relating to the clean development mechanism, as per the SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L20. Finally, I note that despite the best efforts of the parties to come to an agreed outcome on all items, the SBI could not complete its work and sought your further guidance on following matters, which were considered jointly by with the SUBSTA. Matters relating to the Forum on Impact of Implementation of Response Measures serving the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, as per joint SUBSTA SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L16. I trust that parties will continue to engage constructively under your able guidance to reach agreement on these critical issues. Mr. President, allow me to thank you for your guidance at this session, and I would also like to thank the co-chairs and co-facilitators for their dedication and tireless support. This concludes my report to the CMP. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Nabil. I invite the CMP to take note of the oral reports by the chairs, the draft report on the 59th session of the SUBSTA contained in document FCC/SUBSTA/2023/L.9, and the draft report on the 59th session of the SBI contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L.13, and the report on the 58th session of the SUBSTA contained in document FCC/SUBSTA/2023/4 and add 1, and the report on the 58th session of the SBI contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/10, add 1 and core 1. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. The fourth meeting of the CMP is suspended. I declare open the fourth meeting of the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. I invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 3, Sub-Items A and B, reports of the subsidiary bodies, report of the SUBSTA, and report of the SBI. I invite Harry to introduce the report on the work of the SUBSTA. Harry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure to report on the work conducted by the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice at its 58th session held in Bonn and the 59th session here in Dubai. The 59th session of the SUBSTA closed on Wednesday, the 6th of December, after adoption conclusion, including recommendations for draft decisions. The report on SUBSTA 58 is contained in document FCC/SUBSTA/2023/4 and Art 1. The draft report on the 59th session is contained in document FCC/SUBSTA/2023/L9. Mr. President, in addition to completing the work entrusted by the CMA to the SUBSTA, and the large numbers of mandated events convened under the guidance of the SUBSTA in June recommended a draft CMA decision entitled 6th Assessment Report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, contained in document FCC/SUBSTA/2023/L7/Add2. Here in Dubai, in addition to the work captured in the conclusions, adopted on Wednesday, the SUBSTA recommended draft decision as follows. 2 draft decisions recommended together with SBI to the appropriate body or bodies pending the outcome of the President's consultations on the governance of the Warsaw International Mechanism. The draft decision entitled Matters Related to the Santiago Network under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts, contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L17, on the selection of the joint proposal submitted by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and the United Nations Office for Project Services for hosting the Santiago Network Secretariat for an initial term of 5 years with 5 years renewable periods. And the draft decision contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L12 on the report of the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impact. Also, with the SBI, the SUBSTA recommended the draft decision on joint annual report of the Technology Executive Committee and the Climate Technology Center and Network entitled Enhancing Climate Technology Development and Transfer through the Technology Mechanism, and contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L10. Mr. President, I would like to recommend that the CMA 5 adopts the aforementioned draft CMA decision. I also note that Despite the best efforts of parties to come to an agreed outcome on all items, the SUBSTA could not complete its work and sought your further guidance on the following matters, which were considered jointly with the SBI. 1. Matters related to the global stocktake under the Paris Agreement, as per the joint SUBSTA-SBI conclusion contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L11. 2. Sharm el-Sheikh Mitigation Ambition and Implementation Work Programme referred to in Decision 4 CMA 4, as per the joint SUBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L15. 3. Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Programme on the Global Goal on Adaptation referred to in Decision 7 CMA 3, as per the joint SUBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L13. 4th, Work Programme on Just Transition Pathways referred to in the relevant paragraphs of the Decision 1 CMA 4, as per the joint SUBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L14. 5th, matters related to the Forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures serving the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, as per the joint SUBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in the document FCCC/SB/2023/L16. And finally, 6, on matters related to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which was exclusively in SUBSTA item, as per the conclusions contained in document FCCC/SUBSTA/2023/L12, L13, and L11. I trust that parties will continue to work on the solution under your able guidance, and I'm confident that they will find way forwards, as they so clearly have demonstrated the past week. In concluding, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for the guidance you provided to me and the SUBSTA. I also would like to thank the co-chairs, co-facilitators, and all parties for their efforts. This concludes my report as SUBSTA Chair to the CMA. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Harry. I invite Nabil to introduce the report on the work of the SBI. Nabil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now it is my pleasure to report on the work conducted by the subsidiary body on implementation at its 58th session held in Bonn and at its 59th session here in Dubai. The 59th session of SBI closed on Wednesday, 6th of December, after adopting conclusions including recommendations for draft decisions. The report on SBI 58 is contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/10 and Core 1 and FCCC/SBI/2023/10/Add1. The draft report on the 59th session is contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/L13. Mr. President, in addition to completing its work entrusted to the SBI and the large number of mandated events convened under the guidance of the SBI in June recommended a draft decision entitled Terms of Reference for the second review of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, contained in document FCCC/SBI/2023/10/Add1. This was recommended to the COP with a view to the COP recommending it for the consideration and adoption by the CMA. Here in Dubai, in addition to the work captured in the conclusions adopted on Wednesday, the SBI recommended the following draft CMA conclusions. 2 draft decisions recommended together with the SUBSTA to the appropriate body or bodies pending the outcome of the President's consultations on the governance of the Warsaw International Mechanism. 1. The draft decision entitled Matters Relating to the Santiago Network under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts, contained in document FCCC/SB/2023/L17, on the selection of joint proposals submitted by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and the United Nations Office for Project Services for hosting the Santiago Network Secretariat for an initial period of 5 years with 5-year renewal periods. And second, the draft decision contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L12 on the report of the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts. Also with SBSTA, the SBI recommended the draft decision contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L10 on joint annual report of the Technology Executive Committee and the Climate Technology Center and Network, entitled Enhancing Climate Technology Development and Transfer through the Technology Mechanism. On capacity building matters, the SBI recommended the draft decision contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L19 on the annual technical progress report of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building for 2023. Mr. President, I would like to recommend that the CMA-5 adopts the aforementioned draft CMA decisions. I also note that despite best efforts of the parties to come to an agreed outcome on all items, the SBI could not complete its work and sought further guidance on the following matters, which were considered jointly with the SBSTA. 1. Matters relating to the global stocktake under the Paris Agreement, as per the joint SBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L11. 2. Sharm el-Sheikh Mitigation Ambition and Implementation Work Programme referred to in Decision 4/CMA4 as per the joint SBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L15. 3. Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Programme on the Global Goal on Adaptation referred to in Decision 7/CMA3 as per the joint SBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L13. 4. Work Programme on Just Transition Pathways referred to in the relevant paragraphs of Decision 1/CMA4 as per the joint SBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L14. And 5. Matters relating to the Forum on the impact of implementation of response measures serving the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement, as per the joint SBSTA-SBI conclusions contained in document FCC/SB/2023/L16. Finally, the SBI could not complete its work and sought your further guidance as per the SBI conclusions contained in FCC/SBI/2023/L21 on reporting and review pursuant to Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, provision of financial and technical support to developing country parties for reporting and capacity building. I trust the parties will continue to engage constructively under your able guidance to reach agreement on these issues. Mr. President, allow me to thank you for your guidance at this session. I would also like to thank the co-chairs and co-facilitators for their dedication and tireless work. This concludes my report to the CMA. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Nabil. I invite the CMA to take note of the oral reports by the chairs. The draft report on the 59th session of the SBSTA contained in document FCC/SBSTA/2023/L.9 and the draft report on the 59th session of the SBI contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/L.13 and the report on the 58th session of the SBSTA contained in document FCC/SBSTA/2023/4 and add 1 and the report on 58th session of the SBI contained in document FCC/SBI/2023/10, add 1 and core 1. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Let me thank again the SB chairs for their leadership for their support, for their commitment, stewardship, and hard work. We very much appreciate their efforts and their support throughout. The fourth meeting of the CMA is suspended.
If I may kindly request us to stay seated, we will move to the second part of this formal plenary. Let's take our seats and proceed. Thank you.
I now resume the fourth meeting of the Conference of the Parties. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2F, Organization of Work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. Dear colleagues, I shall now outline how I propose to organize work during the second week of the conference so that we accelerate and complete outstanding issues in the next 5 days or less, and bring the conference to a successful close by 11 a.m. on the morning of December 12th. Following this meeting of the COP, I shall resume the CMP and then the CMA to confirm the arrangements in those bodies. As I announced at the informal plenary, after the closing of the subsidiary bodies, I propose to organize work using a tailored approach to conclude all outstanding elements, recognizing that some need more discussion and others require focused political engagement to find an overall balanced and comprehensive way forward. As I outlined on Wednesday night, I have invited pairs of ministers to lead the consultations on my behalf on outstanding issues that will benefit from political guidance. I am also inviting senior negotiators to conduct consultations on my behalf on outstanding technical work relating to items under the governing bodies, as well as on specific issues forwarded from the subsidiary bodies. Work that was launched under the governing bodies at their opening plenaries will continue over the coming days. I expect the ministerial consultations to provide the COP28 presidency with support to advance areas of convergence on the global stocktake and to ensure coherence with other outstanding issues. Consultations on cross-cutting issues under the GST will be convened by Her Excellency Barbara Creasy and His Excellency Dan Jorgensen. Consultations on issues relating to mitigation will be convened by Her Excellency Grace Fu and His Excellency Espen Barth Eide. Consultations on issues related to adaptation will be convened by Her Excellency Maisa Rojas and Her Excellency Jennifer McAllister. And consultations on issues related to means of implementation will be convened by Her Excellency Yasmin Fuad and His Excellency Stephen Galbo. These pairs of ministers have been assisting me over the past few months by conducting political consultations to better understand the key issues across the different thematical areas. I wish to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude for their continued engagement and support. They will begin consultations today and will report back to me tomorrow evening on the successful outcome of their work. In addition, I have asked Joseph Tu from Singapore and Alison Campbell, United Kingdom, to prepare a third iteration of the building blocks, taking into account the views and submissions provided by parties on the second iteration. I have asked them to make this text available today to parties. My presidency team will convene a meeting of heads of delegation later today, following the publication of this third iteration, to hear your views. Regarding other outstanding technical work relating to items under the governing bodies, as well as on specific issues forwarded from the subsidiary bodies, allow me to outline the organization of work going forward. On the mitigation, ambition and implementation work program, I have asked Carlos Fuller from Belize and Kai Harrison from New Zealand to conduct consultations on my behalf in order to conclude work on this item. Regarding the work program on just transition pathways, I have asked Marianne Carlson from Norway and Simon Cardy from South Africa to conclude work on this matter. On the global goal on adaptation, I have asked the SB chairs Hari and Nabil to conduct consultations with groups and parties on specific issues within the global goal on adaptation. On matters related to Article 6, I have asked Maria Jishi from Saudi Arabia and Per Stisen from Norway to conclude work on cooperative approaches referred to in Article 6.2. Sonam Tashi, Bhutan, and Kate Hancock, Australia, to conclude work on rules, modalities, and procedures for the mechanism established by Article 6.4. And Kristen K. Trinidad and Tobago, and Jackie Rosigua from New Zealand, to conclude work on the work program under the framework for non-market approaches referred to in Article 6.8. Regarding response measures, I have asked Andre Marcu Honduras and another senior delegate who will be announced shortly to conclude work on the forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures serving the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. Regarding reporting and review pursuant to Article 13 of the Paris Agreement provision of financial and technical support to developing country parties for reporting and capacity building, I have asked Julia Gardiner, Australia, and Sandra Mushwandi, South Africa, to conclude work. I wish to extend my sincere appreciation and gratitude to these colleagues for accepting this important responsibility. I expect all technical work to conclude by 3 p.m. on Saturday, December 9th. I strongly encourage parties to use all available methods to make progress to complete all technical work. Information on status of all work will continue to be made available in the daily program and on CCTV. Dear colleagues, I will convene an informal stock-taking plenary tomorrow evening to provide an overview of progress across all consultations. I intend to make use of an open-ended single-sitting majlis at the ministerial and head of delegation levels to bring together the different outcomes to strike the right balance. This single-sitting group will begin on Sunday, December 10th, and will be referred to as the Majlis. which is an Arabic term used to refer to a council or a special gathering. We're trying to nurture a more conducive, collaborative, inclusive environment. More information on the convening of the Majlis will be provided in due course. I hope this approach to the organization of work is agreeable. I hear no objections. It is so decided. We will now proceed on this basis. I declare the meeting of the COP adjourned. Dear colleagues, I now resume the fourth meeting of the CMP. I propose that the CMP follows the same approach to the organization of work of the second week as we just adopted by the COP. Hearing no objections, I see a couple of requests. May I ask Cuba, please? Cuba, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente, y siento tener que interrumpir el procedimiento, pero mi delegación estaba pidiendo la palabra en relación con su propuesta de organización de los trabajos sobre la COP. Permítame primero agradecer todo el esfuerzo que usted está haciendo por ayudarnos a progresar en los resultados de esta importante conferencia. Ya hemos alcanzado algunos, como usted bien lo señaló en su declaración introductoria, y creo que sobre esa base estamos en condiciones para continuar progresando. Usted nos ha explicado cómo pretende organizar los trabajos que todavía, sobre temas que permanecen abiertos, tanto a nivel de consultas ministeriales como en consultas a nivel de expertos, y le ha dado nuevas responsabilidades a los chairs de los SB, pero querría para mayor claridad por lo menos llamar la atención sobre la necesidad de organizar estas consultas tanto a nivel ministeriales como a nivel de cofacilitadores, de manera que no haya overlap o duplicación entre unas consultas y otras. Digamos, si los ministros encargados de avanzar las consultas sobre adaptación, sobre el componente de adaptación del Global Stocktake, no debe reunirse al mismo tiempo que estemos viendo el GST, el GGA, puesto que los expertos entonces no podrán acompañar a sus ministros en las consultas. Me parece que eso es fundamental. También consideramos importante que se permita a todas las delegaciones, con independencia del nivel o rango de la delegación, participar en esas consultas ministeriales. Entendemos que son abiertas para todas las partes. Me parece que esas cosas son importantes apuntarlas. Y finalmente nos gustaría conocer, sabemos que como parte del conjunto de acuerdos que adoptamos en la sesión de apertura de la COP, usted decidió emprender consultas presidenciales sobre un grupo de temas que habían sido propuestos para la agenda. Querríamos conocer cuál es la intención sobre comunicar a las partes el resultado de esas consultas presidenciales sobre los temas sobre los cuales se decidió. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Cuba. I see other parties have requested the floor. I will open the floor for statements in a few minutes. May I ask your indulgence? I propose that the CMP follows the same approach to the organization of work for the second week as was just adopted by the COP. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. The meeting of the CMP is adjourned. I now resume the fourth meeting of the CMA. I propose that the CMA follows the same approach to the organization of work for the second week as just adopted in the COP. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I would invite the Executive Secretary to deliver some remarks. Simon, you have the floor.
Delegates, at the start Apologies. Delegates, at the start of the second week and this next intense period of work, I thank you all for the hard work and progress made thus far. Colleagues, if you don't begin bending the emissions curve in the next 2 years, we will pass key tipping points. What you're negotiating today can set our trajectory on these points of no return. If we pass these key thresholds, we can never go back. From the planet's perspective, 1.5 is a tangible limit. It is not simply a choice. Past 1.5 degrees, and we're likely to irreversibly lose ice sheets. If they go, there will be a 10-meter sea level rise across the globe. This will flood central parts of most coastal cities and coastal areas, forcing hundreds of millions of people to relocate. Past 1.5, and we're likely to lose all tropical coral reef systems, which provide the sustenance and livelihoods to hundreds of millions of people. Past 1.5, models predict that in less than 50 years, 2 billion people will live in areas so hot they are beyond the human limit and are a threat to life. The transition we need to make is nothing compared to the one that will be forced on us if we let go of the 1.5 ambition. Technology can help us, but it can only complement political commitments. It cannot replace them. So when you're looking at the Global Stocktake text, look at it through this lens. Today, we have a starting text that is a mixture of posturing and lowest common denominator positions. We have a week left. The challenge now is to sort the wheat from the chaff. There are low, middle, and high options on many issues. If we want to save lives now and keep the 1.5 goal within reach, the highest ambition COP outcomes must stay front and center. As negotiators, you need to start with the highest ambition outcome and ask, how do we get there? Yes, you must make compromises, but not on 1.5 degrees. And you must not leave adaptation behind. Even if we are successful in arresting global warming, huge changes are already in motion. We need to build a world resilient enough to manage those changes. We have to get a strong text on the global goal on adaptation. Posturing and undue procedural hindrances must not stand in the way of an effective outcome on this matter. Science-based targets must be our North Star, and economic policies must be the rocket that gets us there. The scale of the transition we're discussing is huge. These policies must provide the soft landing for areas most affected by the transition and ensure no one is left behind. A just transition is crucial. These texts must signal the investments in the transition that are going to make it all possible. We had a lot of pledges in the first week. We have to use that positive momentum to get us that ambitious text. I also want to end with tipping points. They work both ways. If we get an ambitious, bold text that commit us to keeping 1.5 degrees alive, we will see some great tipping points. We will see money starting to pour into renewable energy and away from uncertain, carbon-emitting projects. We will see finance driven by the right incentives accelerate climate action in the South as well as the North. We will see a dramatic drop in air pollution and their health benefits. We will see a discernible shift towards global resilience and nurturing the well-being of all human beings. And we will see public opinion swinging behind bold leaders who safeguard the future. So let's reflect on the power you have over the coming days to put the world on the right track. It is an opportunity which I hope you agree will be too good to let slip between our fingers. I thank you.
Thank you, Simon, and allow me to thank the earlier speaker from Cuba for your useful comments, which we will take into account in organizing our work and ensuring inclusivity. I would now like to open the floor for any statements, first from groups and parties, and then from observers. The floor is open, and now I'd like to invite Samoa. Samoa, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Samoa is honored to speak on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. We align ourselves also with remarks made by Cuba on behalf of G77. AOSIS thanks you, Mr. President, on your leadership and also for setting out the way forward this week on critical outstanding matters. Allow me, Mr. President, to utilize this opportunity to highlight a few matters of critical concerns to AOSIS. But before I move to substantive matters, I am compelled to speak to a matter of principle. AOSIS wants to make it extremely clear that we will not entertain under any agenda item in this process further attempts to undermine provision for the special needs and circumstances of SIDS. The specific needs and special circumstances of SIDS are enshrined in international law as a special case for sustainable development. Sustainable development provides the context for all of our work to address climate change, and we are not here to renegotiate the Convention and its Paris Agreement. Accordingly, Mr. President, SIDS expect the fundamental principle of the special circumstances of SIDS to be respected by all. On matters related to the GSD, the outcome will be consequential in our collective effort to keep the 1.5 within reach and to reduce loss and damage. We must show the world that multilateralism in its broadest sense, inclusive of non-party stakeholders, can succeed in addressing the global climate crisis. Our priorities to be reflected in the GSD decision remain the same as of day one of the conference. We still see room for a high-level political outcome as part of this process. For AOSIS, the follow-up to this first GSD will be key. The group feels that we will need a roadmap to take us from here to 2025, when new NDCs are to be delivered and when we will have the outcome of the NCQG process settled. For this COP, we need an outcome. That includes the phasing out of fossil fuels in line with 1.5, the best available science, and the principles and provisions of the Paris Agreement. No new investments in fossil fuel production and distribution infrastructure, particularly from major emitters, as part of a just and fair, equitable transition. Setting global targets for tripling renewable energy capacity and doubling energy efficiency by 2030, as long as it is additional to a commitment to fossil fuel phase-out and does not replace those efforts. The end of fossil fuel subsidies also. The strengthening of current NDCs, and in response to the GSD, new NDCs in 2025 that align with the 1.5 goal. a technology implementation plan to support the ambition we set for our mitigation actions, especially in relation to renewable energy. AOSIS also calls for the provision of adequate finance, capacity building, and technical support to SIDS for designing their new NDCs and for participating in the enhanced transparency framework as well as the Article 6 arrangement. Please be assured that our members will actively engage in this afternoon's heads of delegations on the GST. On matters related to the mitigation work program, process has been slow, but AOSIS stands ready to engage on the draft decision text in an effort to reach an understanding on its scope and content. AOSIS is aiming for a decision which reflects urgency in line with the latest science, captures key findings and actionable solutions for the first year of the MWP, and details areas of improvement for MWP in 2024. We recognize the value added of the MWP in supporting parties in their efforts to increase ambition and accelerate implementation of the NDCs in this critical decade. On matters related to adaptation, we recognize that the priorities of all the parties are reflected in the text before us, and AOSIS will keep engaging on this process. Our key asks on adaptation include ensuring that the GGA framework is centered around enhancing well-being of people and the planet. AOSIS also strongly believes that the means of implementation, including finance, technology transfer, and capacity building, must be included in the GGA framework. Ensuring that the specific needs and special circumstances of SIDS are also recognized in the framework. On matters related to finance, we are engaging on text on all the agenda items and wishes to stress the cross-cutting priority of enhancing access to finance for SIDS, ensuring the recognition of the special needs and circumstances of SIDS. On the NCQG, AOSIS believes that the discussion from the technical expert dialogue should feed into the decision text in a way that captures convergence, including around the time frame and the thematic areas for the new goals. We believe that to arrive at a successful outcome by COP29, the negotiation process should be given a space under the SPs. Mr. President, we look forward to outcomes on all issues that are as ambitious and comprehensive as those on loss and damage. COP28 is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to address the climate crisis and achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. The world knows this, and they are watching. Rest assured that AOSIS you have AOSIS' full support and cooperation as we enter the next phase of negotiations. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I'd like now to invite European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. We are speaking on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. Let me start by expressing our strong support to COP presidency. We take very seriously your promise to make this COP a turning point on climate action in this critical decade. Allow me to explain what Europeans think on what it means. We must keep 1.5 within reach across all negotiated mandates. To achieve this, things can be done differently, and we are here to support you. We are ready to open this new chapter for human prosperity, including to inspire the next round of NDCs. The time has come to be serious about the energy transition that should be just. We need to deliver, and we need to deliver also on the enablers to secure the energy access to all. This means a sharp decline in emissions, and this means reducing consumption and production of fossil fuels to ensure an orderly phase out of them. We need resilient infrastructures to guarantee access to clean water, guarantee food security, safeguard ecosystems and biodiversity, and be ready to adapt to the impacts of climate change. The more we invest in sustainable energy, the better our chance to avoid loss and damage, maintaining our ability to adapt and protect the most vulnerable. This cannot be done unless we change the terms of reference of the global financial system to ensure that all financial flows are aligned with Paris. The more we advance in this transition, the more secure investments will be and the more space for adaptation will be, including resources. Guidance coming from this process are needed to overcome structural challenges which hinder the capacity of countries to act, such as indebtedness and cost of capital, and to look at ways to enhance the mobilization of resources both from public and private, including innovative financial instruments based on the polluter pays principle, including a bold invitation to oil and gas corporations to invest in development in vulnerable countries. That should be also Paris-aligned. This realignment in financial flows is not about substituting our commitments on public finance, but about investing in climate security. The GST decision that we are negotiating here is a unique opportunity to provide all of these signals, which also needs to include, under any scenario, a strong and clear GGA framework on adaptation to enhance the well-being of people, the planet, and to maintain also the secureness that we need in this process. We cannot ignore the fact that there are significant gaps on adaptation, both in terms of finance, but also in terms of planning and implementation that we need to be close. The EU is committed to keeping the bar high across all negotiating streams. Expectations are high for this COP, and we appreciate the role you, our negotiating partners, and the international community has played in raising this ambition. Now work together to deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. I'd like to invite Australia. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, I'm pleased to speak on behalf of the umbrella group of countries, and can I personally thank you for your leadership and cooperation in the lead-up to this very important week. And we thank you for laying out the approach for coming days. We look forward to working with you and parties towards ambitious outcomes that remain true and meaningfully advance the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Substantively, we emphasise the importance of clear signals from the Global Stocktake to accelerate global action. It must call for urgent action in light of the findings of the IPCC that to keep 1.5 degrees in reach, the world needs to collectively peak emissions by 2025, cut emissions by 43% on 2019 levels by 2030 and 60% by 2035. It must call, in our view, on all countries to align their NDCs in keeping with 1.5 degrees within reach, and encourage all parties to include economy-wide absolute emission reduction targets, including all greenhouse gases, sectors and categories in their NDCs. It should call for a rapid scaling up of clean energy, coupled with a global phase-out of unabated fossil fuels so as to achieve net zero energy systems by 2050 alongside other mitigation outcomes. The GST must, in our view, assess collective progress for and strengthen action relating to making financial flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development to help drive the investment necessary to keep 1.5 degrees within reach and to achieve adaptation goals. Article 21C is one of the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, and it must be adequately addressed. The GST must remain true to its mandate. We need a strong and substantive outcome on the first annual decision under the Mitigation Work Programme, including to highlight key opportunities and send signals to investors and decision makers. On finance, we need to ourselves to reach up to an ambitious outcome on the NCQG in 2024. We must establish a fit-for-purpose process that helps parties translate options to arrive at the text. We should also decide this year for the goal to be multi-layered, including both public and private finance, to maximise the scale and impact of the new goal. We do call on all parties to move forward on discussions on a framework for the global goal of adaptation that meaningfully advances the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We support the idea of guiding stars to galvanise common principles and priorities such as in water, food, health, infrastructure and biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. The framework must be applicable to all while allowing for different starting points and capabilities. We look forward to a timely decision to establish the Just Transition Work Programme to share experiences and best practices focused approach with parties and non-party stakeholders to foster collectively understanding as important. And on Article 6, we welcome the continuation of this important work at the technical level to operationalise Article 6 in accordance with our mandate. Mr. President, we are ready to get to work.
Thank you, Australia. I'd like to invite Switzerland. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have the honour to speak on behalf of the Environmental Integrity Group, comprising Georgia, Liechtenstein, Mexico, Monaco, the Republic of Korea, and Switzerland. This COP has tremendous opportunity to map the route to how we will keep 1.5 alive, and how, for the first time in history, humanity is coming together to chart the path to transition, the energy transition. First, we need to see a clear guidance towards the next round of NDCs. This is the core mandate of the GST and the heart of climate action. We need a call for all countries to adopt economy-wide NDCs that include all sectors and gases, that are aligned with the 1.5-degree objective, and that respect IPCC recommendations to reduce emissions globally by 33% by 2030 and 60% by 2035. We should think of building a strong process to accompany the preparation of the next round of NDCs. And we expect to see a message supporting global peaking of emissions by 2025 and net zero by 2050. All our messages coming out of this COP have to be aligned with the best available science. We also expect a strong signal that nature is at the heart of the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and that nature-based solution and ecosystem-based approaches, as well as human rights and gender perspective, should complement the urgent emissions reductions measures needed. On energy transition, we need to see a clear call that the future is not fossil fuels, and that we must transition away from fossil fuels. We welcome your call to triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency to be reflected in the COP28 outcome. I would like to ensure that we have a way to follow up on those commitments towards a just energy transition. COP28 must set a clear way forward on how what we agree in Dubai will be implemented. On adaptation, we need to see clear, concrete recommendations and signals on adaptation substance and the policy cycle that are easy to track and can help raise the visibility of adaptation at international level and allow us to implement adaptation measures at domestic level in a way to preserve and conserve the ecosystems and the well-being of humankind. And we need to see how to continue our work and achieve the objective to make all financial flows consistent with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Above all, we hope to see a strong outcome that delivers a message on unity and commitment to the Paris Agreement. We are all coming with our specific national circumstances, but we have to contribute to our highest possible ambition, working jointly and collaboratively to achieve the vision we drew with the Paris Agreement. The outcome must deliver on the mandate of the Global Stocktake to enhance international cooperation and move to transformational levels of action. To do that, everyone must leave COP28 knowing what is expected of them in 2024. Please count on the EIG to work constructively with all colleagues in this room to try to identify solutions and possible landing grounds that can accommodate all these. We expect a process that is transparent and inclusive, so that all groups are represented and can contribute and assist you in delivering an ambitious outcome. This will be key to ensure that the outcome will be supported by all parties and carried forward in a forceful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Now I'd like to give the floor to Bolivia. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Bolivia speaks on behalf of the like-minded developing countries, LNDC. We associate ourselves with the statements of Cuba on behalf of the G77 and China. Mr. COP President, we appreciate your vision about the deliverables out of COP28, but we have suggestions on process and substance, which we would request you and your team to facilitate to ensure ambitious and balanced outcomes out of COP28. On process, we must correct the process from the previous week, which was disadvantageous for us because of the lack of meaningful party-driven negotiations, and in most cases didn't capture our views in draft texts. This is a party-driven process, and progress requires the agreement of all parties. Mr. President, progress in this process requires agreement of all parties, not a select few. In this week, we expect negotiations must progress in a balanced manner. Party-driven nature of negotiations must be implemented in letter and spirit. We should make efforts to discuss issues at the technical level before moving select few issues to the high level. Co-facilitators, ministerial pairs facilitating items must respond to all parties' views, There should not be any overlapping meetings taking place. If technical negotiations on texts are taking place, ministerial consultation should not happen. Ministers need their technical experts to be with them during the ministerial consultations. Negotiations must not clash with our coordination time. On substance, President, we are not here to renegotiate the Convention and its Paris Agreement. Any outcome that doesn't respect the principles and provisions of the Convention, an outcome without equity and CBDR in particular, an outcome that does not safeguard the focus on emissions and not sources of emissions, would not fulfill the purpose of the Paris Agreement, which is to advance the implementation of the Convention. Such an outcome would not be acceptable to our group. The Convention and its Paris Agreement legally mandate developed countries to take the lead and to provide and mobilize means of implementation support to developing countries. We will not accept any attempts for these obligations to be diluted. We support more ambition on mitigation, but we also need to ensure full implementation of current plans and pledges in developing countries. In this context, calls for ambitious mitigation must be supported by full provisions of support to implement current NDCs and NAPs, with clear commitment from developed countries to provide means of implementation support to developing countries. Unilateral climate-based and related measures are adversely impacting our efforts to develop in a sustainable manner. This must not be used as a tool for protectionism or to sanction exports from developing countries. COP28 will not achieve its legacy with an unbalanced GST, an unbalanced GGA, and unbalanced outcomes that disadvantage the Global South. COP28 will achieve its legacy when developed countries act in accordance with and pay for their historical responsibility in causing the climate crisis, when developed countries deliver on their promises and stop trying to shift their obligations to developing countries. We deliver for the poor in our parts of the world who are suffering the impacts of something that they have not caused. When we go beyond the media glare and do what's more important, protect the lives of our people and of Mother Earth. When we stop trying to renegotiate the Convention and its Paris Agreement, just because our partners don't like equity and CBDR. When developed countries reach at the earliest net zero and net negative emission levels, this will provide the much needed space for development to developing countries. Mr. President, COP28 will achieve its true legacy if it ends carbon colonialism. We will not compromise our right to development. As the COP28 presidency, we expect you to facilitate these outcomes among parties in an open, consensus-based, inclusive, party-driven and balanced manner. Let's go to work. We thank you, President.
Thank you, Bolivia. I'd like to invite Guatemala to take the floor. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guatemala speaks on behalf of ILAC, but first let me say that we align to the remarks of the G77 and China. Mr. Chair, we support your guidance and leadership at COP28 for the achievements during the first days of the first week, sending an important and very positive signal to the whole world that is watching us and is in expectancy with hope for a better future. I believe that the heart of this COP is the Global Stocktake, same that represents a crucial opportunity, likely the last one to correct the course, with the choices we make having immediate and long-term impacts. We all understand that Global Stocktake's role extends beyond 2023. Therefore, it must provide clear, actionable guidance for ambitious NDCs and align global and regional efforts starting in 2024. It's vital that we can ensure that the Global Stocktake focuses on holistic and systemic transformations guided by the latest science and equity. We believe it should assert forward-looking actions and not constrained only by past experiences. Our commitments must unequivocally aim for a just and equitable phase-out of all fossil fuels led by developed countries. ILAC firmly opposes any language in the Global Stocktake that could serve as a loophole or a tacit endorsement for the continued expansion of the fossil fuel industry. Our commitment to addressing the root cause of the climate crisis is unwavering, and we will diligently work to ensure that the Global Stocktake reflects this urgency. Achieving a transition pathway that are just and inclusive, contributing to the reduction of GHG emissions, achieving greater climate and resilience adaptation, and reduction in climate risks. We are concerned on the slow progress of the whole adaptation agenda. Now we must ensure that the discussions on the global goal on adaptation produce a decision text with clear elements for the adoption of the framework, the identification of targets and means of implementation. We do recognize the pledges announced on adaptation, but is of much concern that a gap still remains. Enhanced ambition includes enhanced means of implementation. That is why we propose as G77 countries the Technology Implementation Program. Finance provisions and mobilization, technology transfer and capacity building will be key to accelerate the energy transition. We need to add developed countries, parties, and others as well as multilateral development banks and NPAs, in particular financial institutions. We need to urge bilateral, multilateral, and private creditors to scale up debt for climate and nature swaps, to allow developing countries to use debt service payments for investments in sustainable development, and take multilateral measures to standardize the use of these mechanisms. Finally, Mr. Chair, on the new collective quantified goal for ILAC, it is of utmost importance that we decide on a process for 2024 that will shift our modality of work. We require a process that's fit for purpose, party-driven and inclusive, and ensures that parties engage in negotiating draft text that will take us to establish the NCQG for CMA 6. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Guatemala. I'd like to invite Zambia to take the floor. Zambia, you have the floor.
We'd like to thank you sincerely, Mr. President, for your leadership and for excellently guiding us with our work so far. We believe that with your guidance, we are on the verge of giving ourselves a successful COP. Mr. President, we'd like to reiterate that adaptation is a key priority for the continent and a critical component in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Therefore, the launching of the GGA framework is one of the most important outcomes for Africa at COP28. At the heart of the framework is the development of qualitative and quantitative dimensional and thematic targets that are measurable and time-bound to help us achieve the objective of the GGA. Mr. President, Africa believes that a detailed outcome on the GGA, we believe a mandate as important as the GST is one of the outcomes on which we should measure the success of COP28. Mr. President, on the Global Stocktake, we believe the objective of the Paris Agreement in Article 2.1 places emphasis on the pursuit of enhancing climate action in the context of sustainable development and eradication of poverty. The GST outcome must be guided, therefore, by the principles of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. On the just transition pathways, Mr. President, we are of the view that this work program will advance the implementation of climate action and strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change in the context of sustainable development. We therefore believe that COP28 should agree on the work program's scope and modalities, mandating the SBs to carry out the work and the CMA to reach the annual decision to guide the work program. Mr. President, on climate finance, we believe that there's no ambition without climate finance and that we cannot implement our actions if there's no finance at all. So, Mr. President, we believe that for us to really call this COP a successful COP, which COP has already delivered on some issues, and we believe that with your guidance, COP28 will be a successful COP. I thank you.
I thank you very much for your views, feedback, and comments. I promise we took note and we will action. Allow me now to invite Marshall Islands to take the floor. Marshall Islands, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to align with the remarks made by Cuba on behalf of G77 and China, and by Samoa on behalf of AOSIS. I would also like to echo the remarks of the Executive Secretary. I am disappointed to see that there is slow progress in the negotiations so far. We have no doubt that we need to deliver a course correction from the Global Stocktake that keeps 1.5 alive and builds a more resilient world. We need to be strong and phase out the consumption and production of all fossil fuels and the subsidies that support them. That includes oil and gas, not just fossil fuel emissions, not unabated fossil fuels, all fossil fuels. There can be no get out of jail free clauses for the fossil fuel industry based on technologies that can and won't deliver the halving of greenhouse gases needed this decade. Ensuring global clean energy is vital to leaving no one behind. Every party must put in place revised and new 1.5 degrees aligned indices and follow up to ensure they are delivered. On adaptation, we cannot allow blocking or stalling on an issue that matters so much. We need to leave here with a framework, adaptation finance, that we can build trust and save lives will be critical. Transformational finance is needed. Countries can be forced to choose between fighting poverty and climate action. The GST must deliver on all these elements, or this COP will fail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marshall Islands. I'd like to invite Serbia to take the floor. Serbia, you have the floor.
Excellence, c'est le Sénégal, pas la Serbie. Monsieur le Président de la COP, Président des organes subsidiaires, distingués délégués et collègues, le Sénégal a le privilège de faire cette déclaration au nom des 46 pays les moins avancés. Nous sommes tous réunis ici à Dubaï avec une énorme responsabilité, comme l'a rappelé M. Simon Steele. Le groupe des PMA reste déterminé dans son engagement sur toutes les questions depuis le début de la session, travaillant de manière collaborative et constructive avec toutes les parties prenantes pour s'assurer que la COP28 réponde à nos attentes. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, pour tous les efforts considérables sur votre leadership. Félicitations surtout pour le résultat historique sur l'opérationnalisation du fonds pertes et dommages dès le début de la COP. Nous continuons à espérer avoir un résultat ambitieux, juste, décrivant une action climatique urgente et intensifiée. Sur le bilan mondial, nous exprimons notre inquiétude quant au fait que les progrès sur le texte ne suffisent pas à résoudre la crise climatique. L'accord de Paris nous oblige à prendre des mesures significatives en fournissant des orientations pour une réduction urgente des émissions et une mobilisation financière conforme au seuil de 1,5 degrés Celsius. Crucial pour la sécurité de la planète. Des éléments clés tels que le plafonnement des émissions d'ici 2025, la réduction urgente des émissions au cours de cette décennie critique et lors de la prochaine série des CDN, ainsi que le soutien accru à l'adaptation et à la résolution des pertes et préjudices, le financement de cette ambition ainsi qu'une coopération internationale adéquate figurent toujours parmi les options du texte que nous avons proposé pour la suite des négociations. Nous avons besoin de résultats pour combler l'écart et les pays développés doivent prendre le leadership et nous invitons les autres à suivre. Nous sommes tous responsables. Monsieur le Président, nous espérons progresser sur ces questions sous votre supervision. Sur l'atténuation, nous sommes très déçus de l'avancement du programme de travail d'atténuation. Nous, PMA, sommes restés engagés tout au long du processus depuis la COP26. L'atténuation est extrêmement importante pour nous car nous sommes en première ligne d'une catastrophe climatique. Il est extrêmement crucial de rester sur la bonne voie pour atteindre l'objectif du 1,5 degré Celsius de l'accord de Paris. Cependant, les parties impliquées dans le processus n'ont pas réussi à reconnaître l'urgence et l'importance de cette question selon les meilleures données scientifiques disponibles. Nous restons déterminés à poursuivre les travaux sur le texte sous la direction des présidents. Sur l'adaptation, le groupe des PMA reste préoccupé par les progrès insuffisants en matière d'adaptation. Notre profonde préoccupation réside dans le fait que l'adaptation, pierre angulaire de notre action climatique, continue d'être reléguée au second plan. L'objectif mondial en matière d'adaptation, nous sommes profondément déçus de ne pas avoir pu transmettre un projet de texte à la CMA. L'adaptation est une question cruciale et le groupe des PMA considère qu'un résultat sur le DDA est essentiel pour améliorer la mise en œuvre du DDA et mettre en œuvre des mesures d'adaptation sur le terrain dans les PMA. Soyons clairs, un résultat ambitieux sur le DDA est un élément essentiel d'un paquet politique équilibré à l'issue de la COP28. En ce qui concerne les pertes et préjudices, nous magnifions le progrès historique qui a été réalisé ici à Dubaï. Nous nous félicitons de la décision que nous avons prise concernant le réseau de Santiago et attendons avec impatience la fourniture de l'assistance technique sous la direction du Conseil consultatif et bien sûr du Fonds des pertes et préjudices. L'assistance technique et le financement sont essentiels pour que les pays soient en mesure de faire face à cette problématique. Concernant le financement, nous espérons parvenir à un accord sur la définition de la finance climat, le financement effectif de la mise en œuvre des plans nationaux d'adaptation et une clarté de feuille de route sur le déboursement du doublement de l'adaptation, tout en reconnaissant que cela n'est qu'un minimum. Mesdames et Messieurs, nous sommes tous engagés en faveur des objectifs de l'accord de Paris et de la Convention. Nous devons garantir que les décisions prises ici à Dubaï nous aideront à atteindre des objectifs communs et je tiens à renforcer que les circonstances spéciales des paiements inscrits dans la Convention ne peuvent et ne doivent faire l'objet d'aucune controverse. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Senegal. May I invite Chile to take the floor. Chile, you have the floor.
Right. Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to say that we align ourselves with the intervention by Cuba on behalf of G77 and Guatemala on behalf of ILAC. I wanted to take the floor to support previous intervention and to underline the important moment that we are at this COP. Although on some aspects negotiations have been slow, it is very critical that we come together and provide a credible answer to the world. And as you said and know, the expectations are high. And this is at the same level at the climate crisis that we're going through. Remember that this year is certainly going to be the hottest year on record, and that we will most likely be very close to 1.5 this year. So in order for the COP to be the course correction that we need, a couple of things need to be tackled successfully. One, on phasing out fossil fuels, because no transition will be successful if we don't tackle the core of the issue. This is the only way to keep 1.5 within reach. Second, on a robust global goal on adaptation that is actionable in response to the daily challenge of many countries and communities that are facing the consequences of climate change. We need to build a resilient world. Three, the COP must provide concrete progress and means of implementation, including the technology implementation program. And four, we cannot forget that the transition has to be fair and inclusive, and we have a chance to design a just transition work program. We expect to see all of these aspects in the GST, as this is the main vehicle to communicate to the world that we have come to Dubai to achieve success. Thank you.
Thank you, Chile. I'd like to invite Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي الدكتور سلطان الجابر رئيس مؤتمر الأطراف 28. السيدات والسادة، يتحدث وفد بلادي باسم المجموعة العربية. أن المجموعة العربية تتفق مع وتؤيد بيان جمهورية كوبا باسم مجموعة 77 والصين. بداية وبالنيابة عن المجموعة أتقدم لكم بالشكر والتقدير على جهودكم القيمة مع جميع دول الأطراف في سبيل دعم المسارات التفاوضية وإحراز التقدم فيما يدعم نجاح مؤتمر الأطراف في الإمارات العربية المتحدة. السادة الرؤساء، تؤكد المجموعة العربية على ضرورة الالتزام بمبادئ الاتفاقية الإطارية لتغير المناخ، وبالأخص مبدأ الإنصاف والمسؤولية المشتركة ولكن المتباينة، وتفعيل هذا المبدأ في حزمة الإجراءات والأنظمة التي يتم التفاوض عليها في كل ما يتعلق بتنفيذ اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ واتفاق باريس. وتود المجموعة العربية تأكيد على أن اتفاق باريس يستهدف الانبعاثات المسببة لتغير المناخ وليس مصادرها. السادة الرؤساء، بما يتعلق بمواضيع التكيف، لا يزال عملنا على إطار الهدف العالمي للتكيف بعيدا عن الانتهاء، وعلينا التكاتف سويا والعمل معا للوصول لإطار متكامل وخارطة الطريق للهدف العالمي للتكيف في مؤتمر الأطراف 28. وتود المجموعة التأكيد على أن التكيف يشكل تحديا عالميا يواجه الجميع وله أبعاد إقليمية ودولية، والاستجابة لهذا التحدي تختلف بناء على الظروف الوطنية والاحتياجات والأولويات لكل دولة. كما ترى المجموعة العربية أهمية برنامج التخفيف وتدعم تقدم العمل فيه حسب ما تم الاتفاق عليه في شرم الشيخ، الذي نص على عدم وضع أهداف جديدة أو فرض ما يتعارض مع سيادة الدول، وأن يتوافق بشكل كلي مع ما تضمنت اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ واتفاق باريس، وعدم الخروج عن بنود تلك الاتفاقيات، وخاصة من خلال تفعيل مبادئ الإنصاف والمسؤوليات المشتركة ولكن المتباينة. معالي الرئيس، تؤكد المجموعة العربية أن تخفيف الآثار الاجتماعية والاقتصادية لتدابير الاستجابة على قمة أولويات البلدان النامية التي تعمل على تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة وضمان النمو والازدهار الاقتصادي. وفي هذا السياق تؤكد المجموعة حرصها الشديد على أهمية مراجعة المنتدى الخاص بتدابير الاستجابة ولجنة كاتوفيتسي، وتحرص المجموعة على أن تكون هذه المراجعة بداية لمرحلة مقبلة تزيد من فاعلية أعمال منتدى تدابير الاستجابة ولجنة كاتوفيتسي للخبراء، مما يساعد الدول على الفهم والحد من الآثار السلبية لتدابير الاستجابة لتغير المناخ. السيد الرئيس، تتطلع المجموعة العربية إلى استكمال عملية الجرد العالمي الشامل الأول على أن تكون عملية الجرد متوازنة وتغطي التكيف والخسائر والأضرار والتخفيف وتدابير الاستجابة ووسائل التنفيذ، وأن تعزز نتائج عملية الجرد العالمي تطبيق مبادئ الإنصاف والمسؤوليات المشتركة ولكن المتباينة، وأن تشير بشفافية إلى جوانب التوافق والاختلاف مع جميع عناصر التنمية المستدامة والحد من الفقر، وأن تقدم حلولا شمولية تأخذ بعين الاعتبار الآثار الاجتماعية والاقتصادية وتؤدي إلى نتائج تزيد الثقة في التعاون الدولي. في الختام، معالي الرئيس، نتطلع للاستمرار بالعمل تحت قيادتكم بنفس روح العمل والتعاون للوصول إلى مخرجات تصب في مصلحة الجميع، وشكرا.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. I'd like to invite Philippines to take the floor. Philippines, you have the floor.
Excellencies, colleagues, at the outset, allow me to commend the exceptional leadership of this COP presidency. This opening of COP28 presents another opportunity for us to work together, show that multilateralism works in the spirit of compromise and consensus, unity and solidarity towards our collective success in this COP. With only a few days left for COP28, we must remain optimistic. We must continue to engage in the negotiations in the most constructive manner, most specifically on the work on the global goal on adaptation and the conclusion of the first Global Stocktake. The Philippines aligns itself with a statement made by Cuba on behalf of the G77, and as we continue in this next phase of negotiations, we emphasize that we need to work more closely together, particularly on the following. On Global Stocktake, in further enhancing our building blocks into GST outcomes that are useful for all, an outcome that is able to inform our work in enhancing climate action and support and international cooperation across all pillars of the Convention and the Paris Agreement, and move faster to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and the ultimate objective of the Convention. Our work must signal efforts anchored on the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, climate justice and equity in light of the best available science, including the IPCC, and the different national circumstances. On the global goal on adaptation, we must remind ourselves that it is during this COP28 that the GGA framework of action must be adopted. This is the framework that will guide our long-term transformational and incremental adaptation efforts, which are urgently needed across communities and sectors such as agriculture. The GGA framework will also guide the activities that emphasize how we can catalyze the implementation and support for adaptation. On mitigation, we need to advance our work on the mitigation work program and the discussions on market and non-market approaches under Article 6. We must take into consideration the historical responsibility on GHG emissions and the needed deep and rapid cuts towards limiting global warming consistent with the Paris Agreement. On just transition, this is also a priority. Aligned with the G77, the Philippines will continue to push for a just transition that is inclusive and fair, which addresses equity across the entire workforce, covering energy, socioeconomic and environmental aspects, and involving social dialogue, with sufficient support from developed countries as part of their commitments under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. At the core of our work, we need to ensure that we have an enabling environment that drives climate resiliency, low carbon, and sustainable development. The urgency of the delivery and mobilization of means of implementation and support in terms of finance, capacity building, and technology development and transfer cannot be overstated, as it permeates all aspects of our discussions in this COP. This includes taking into account the differentiated impacts on children, women and girls, youth, the differently abled, indigenous peoples and local communities and other sectors and stakeholders. We reiterate that this COP28, in making it more historic and ambitious, we need to go beyond political decisions to frameworks and programs that are implementable. Let us focus on getting things done, as we did for the loss and damage agenda, from ambition to action, from hesitation to decision. Excellencies and colleagues, we trust that the Philippines also remains a constructive partner to all of you as we wrap up our work in this COP28. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Colombia. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, say that this statement supports as well the Q1 statement made on behalf of G77 and also the statement made by Guatemala on behalf of ILAC. We are here to evaluate, based on the Global Stocktake, what is our trajectory to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. There is science-based evidence enough to say that our trajectories are not going right now to stabilize the climate to 1.5 Celsius. 1.5 Celsius is not a goal. It is an environmental limit and is already a disaster. It will change the conditions in which we live forever. The UN Environment Programme, in its production gap report, has clearly stated, as well as the IPCC 6 report, that the burning of fossil fuels is responsible for 86% of emissions. Thus, the answer that as a multilateral system we need to give our citizens, and especially the most vulnerable ones, is to reduce the burning, production, extraction of fossil fuels. If we want to be serious about stating that we will stabilize the climate at 1.5 Celsius. However, although under the Paris Agreement and these COPs, we have set targets to reduce emissions, when we see the top 20 producers of fossil fuels, their plans are to double the production. This will take us in 2030 to an increase of 460% of coal extraction, 29% of oil, 82% of gas, compared to what we will need to be consistent with the 1.5. In this situation, adaptation will not be possible. We will overpass the carbon budget, and we will be moving to a world of loss and damage. Adaptation is possible at a limit of 1.5. Beyond that, we will be counting loss and damage. Thus, based on this global stocktake, which is our duty to evaluate and take seriously, based on science reports and the UN system that we all finance are part of, Colombia respectfully wants to invite the parties to commit to the phasing out of fossil fuels and to commit to the 2030 goal of reduction of emissions. Unabated fossil fuels could be something we can talk about after 2030. But if we don't achieve the 2030 window, we cannot say to the generations that were already born in this century that the climate will be stabilized at 1.5 Celsius. The adaptation goals should be released at this COP. We want to invite that we agree on a universal right to early warning systems for all the global population. This could not be only financed to the most vulnerable countries. This is now, with the situation that we have, a right for all. Unworryingly, countries like Colombia, which is the 5th largest exporter of coal, which our economy depends on the export of oil and coal, and who want to make this economic transition, because this is not about only an energy matrix transition. It's an economic transition that will require clear economic rules, are finding ourselves to be punished by the financial system and the economic system, rather than having incentives to move forward with this political will. Our access to capital is becoming more expensive. Our decision to stop exploration has created nervousness in the market. We are threatened to downgrade our qualification in the global credit system, and we are strangled with debt. We want in the finance track to see again the call from this COP to align the financial and economic system and the markets to the reality of the climate crisis. Ambition cannot be punished. Finally, Mr. President, we want to call to speak clearly, together in solidarity on the elephant in the room, which is the difficulty to make this economic transition and leave fossil fuels. It is an unprecedented change, and we need the right economic conditions, and we think that multilaterally we could agree on that. In terms of process, we would like all of us to be included in all conversations, that there will not be closed rooms, that if a party wants to go to a discussion, it has access, so that we can build together the best outcome for this COP, for current and future generations.
Thank you. Thank you, Colombia, for your statement. Allow me now to invite India. India, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We align with the statement made by Cuba on behalf of G77 in China and Bolivia on behalf of LMDC. Mr. President, we would like to place on record our appreciation on the leadership of SB chairs and COP presidency through the first week of COP28. With what has been achieved so far, we are confident of moving towards the shared objectives of fighting climate change. We appreciate the need for open and inclusive environment of negotiations. Shared objectives need shared and inclusive approach involving all party countries. Mr. President, we are at an important turning point in our work at this 28th Conference of Parties at Dubai. We have heard with careful attention the words and plan presented by our COP28 hosts. During the first week, we have shared frankly in what we believe in. This is important to achieve the objectives of Convention and goals of its Paris Agreement. We believe in the principles of Convention and its Paris Agreement and the sanctity of processes under them. We are taking stock of implementation of Paris Agreement through GST. We believe that our next few days we can achieve serious progress in narrowing down the options through direct negotiations between the parties for subsequent ministerial deliberations and consultations. We need a decision that is reached by consensus by negotiations among parties and in conformity with the mandates given by Paris Agreement and 19 CMA 1. This will not only give us a robust GST decision, but will reaffirm our trust and faith in the entire multilateral climate process. We are second to none in our desire for an ambitious outcome, but such ambition must be founded on equity and feasibility in nationally determined manner. The concern of ours applies also to other agenda items, especially that of global goal on adaptation and items that is close to the hearts of developing countries and the billions of people to whom adaptation is the key to their future. We once again reiterate the need for the negotiated outcomes and the opportunity to work towards an end acceptable to all, while ensuring that the same is achieved within the framework of principles and processes of the Convention and its Paris Agreement. Mr. President, we would like to assure you of our continued support to ensure that COP achieves the desired outcome for all. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, India, and thank you all for your statements. I'd like to give the floor to our representative speaking on behalf of women and gender non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Parties, my name is Mwanahamisi Singano, and I'm speaking on behalf of Women and Gender Constituency. As the constituency, we shared some of the sentiments in the closing plenary, and as we have said, we really call for centering of human rights, the rights of indigenous people, and the gender equality across all the outcome of these negotiations. We know and we want to emphasize that human rights are non-negotiable. The lack of progress on adaptation and SB is hugely concerning. Communities around the world, including women, children, the elderly, people with a disability, and indigenous people, suffer the first and potentially the worst impact of climate change. They are in urgent need of adaptation action and you fulfilling your pledges of doubling adaptation finance to help them survive and, more importantly, thrive the rapid changing environment. When it comes to GST parties, we want to remind you that the success of this COP will be measured on the outcome of the Global Stocktake. The decision that must commit parties to the full phase out of fossil fuel, scaling up the quality and quantity of public finance, which is grant-based and gender-responsive finance, but also scaling up generation and use of gender disaggregated data and analysis. And more importantly, the GST outcome must send a strong guidance to ensure that the gender-responsive NDC are being communicated in the next round. With everything that we have heard, we join in solidarity with our partner here to demand a permanent ceasefire now, end to fossil fuels with just a transition, fast, fair, full-funded, feminist, and forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Allow me to invite Israel. I see that Israel have requested the floor. Israel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for not asking for the floor earlier and coming in after non-governmental bodies have begun to speak, and I'll be very brief. At this plenary, we'll limit our comments to the mitigation section of the GST, which, as was said by a colleague, is the heart of this COP, in order to voice our support for, at the very least, the high ambition sections of the document, of the building blocks from paragraphs 15 onwards, and especially 34 to 40. In particular, we support the specific and most ambitious measures mentioned in these paragraphs, including with respect to low energy systems, the phase down of unabated coal power, and the phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, while providing targeted support for the poorest and most vulnerable. Likewise, and without going into detail at this meeting, we support the most ambitious options outlined in paragraph 34, which include tripling renewable energy capacity, doubling the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvement. And in addition to phasing out of unabated fossil fuels and to rapidly reducing their use so as to achieve net zero, specifically a rapid phase out of unabated coal power this decade and an immediate cessation of permitting new unabated coal power generation. And in addition, we support the phasing out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and rapid increasing the deployment pace for zero-emission vehicles. Any further negotiations should not result in the diminishing of these standards, but on their achievement. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Israel. I'll go back to inviting the observers. I kindly request that they stick to a maximum of 2 minutes. And now I give the floor to the representatives of INGO, constituency of environmental NGOs. There are 2 speakers. I'll give each 1 minute. First, I give the floor to a representative from Climate Action Network. You have the floor.
Thank you, President and co-chairs. I'm Pratishtha Singh, speaking on behalf of the Climate Action Network. This COP has a rare and historic opportunity to chart a pathway to a fossil-free era. Do not waste it. This week, leaders must secure an agreement on a full, fast, fair, and funded phase-out of fossil fuels in line with 1.5 degree and addressing the needs of developing countries. The Global Stocktake must include strong guidelines for the next NDCs in line with 1.5 trajectories and connect to finance, adaptation, and mitigation work streams. We are concerned that we will leave this COP with no outcome on adaptation or adaptation finance. This would be a failure. We call on parties to pull up their sleeves and deliver on adaptation. The Just Transition Work Programme should deliver the most ambitious options in the text and cannot be reduced to yet another talk shop. President, pretending to do climate action while striking out equity, justice, and human rights is not an option. It is time to deliver. Ceasefire now, end fossil fuels with just transition, fast, fair, and forever. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Next, I give the floor to a representative from Demand Climate Justice. You have the floor. 1 minute, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, co-chairs. Still standing on existing protocols, I am Aderonke Ege from Nigeria, speaking on behalf of Demand Climate Justice, or DCJ. DCJ wants governments across to know we have high expectations for the outcomes of a Dubai decision, including equity and CBDR must not only be defended, but actually operationalized in GST outcomes, and whatever ways forward to inform all future NDCs, especially developed countries who are still not doing their fair share, yet claim to be climate leaders. Finance must flow as promised, not only overdue obligatory public funds, but also to build more trust as countries appropriately align over time their full financial systems. Fossil fuels need a formal decision for a fair, fast, and funded phase-out, with countries who got rich first by burning fossil fuels going first while supporting equitable exit for all. Forced solutions like offsets, CCS, and dangerous distractions that divert public funding threaten vulnerable communities and prolong deadly pollution. These are not acceptable. We want a people-driven, party-driven, not a big polluter or presidency-driven process. We need a way forward that leaves no country or frontline community behind, not a bulldozer rolling over already marginalized peoples just to seal an undurable and unjust deal. We know COP28 also sets the stage for WTO's 13th ministerial to take place here, right here in the UAE, just 3 months from now. So credibility of a fair international system is at stake. We are watching. The world is watching. We demand climate justice now. Polluters out. People in. Ceasefire now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement. Allow me please to remind you for the 1 minute cap, please. I'd like now to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of farmers, a constituency of farmers, non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies and conference participants, my name is A.G. Kawamura, one of several active farmers representing the farmers' constituency. While we are encouraged to see that COP28 has made good strides to include both time and space for deliberations on agriculture and the global food system, we continue to be concerned that the contributions that farmers, ranchers, foresters, and fishers can make to the achievement of COP goals and to many of the SDGs is not fully appreciated nor understood. Indeed, the SDGs cannot be accomplished if agriculture is doing poorly on our planet. However, while global farmers of all sizes pursue their seasonal harvests and continue their transition to more sustainable and resilient practices, we need support and assistance from this body and other UN platforms. We need civil society groups and the private sector also to support and assist us in our progress and transition. The farmers' constituency encourages the delegations to engage with a renewed sense of urgency, recognizing that the timeline to build more climate-smart and resilient global food systems cannot wait for a perfect plan. We need progress, not more discussion. After all, successful agriculture sustains civilization, and a reliable food supply is essential for humanity to be able to live on Earth. Agriculture, in all of its many dimensions and forms, produces that supply day after day against a long list of challenges, climatic disruptions, and poor policy by those with good intentions, but often poor understanding. We are not actors on the stage of humanity. Farmers build the stage that allows humanity to exist and act out the tragedy, drama, or enlightenment of our existence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement. I'd like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of local governments and municipal authorities. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je m'appelle Vincent Chauvet, je suis le maire d'Autun en France et membre du Comité européen des régions, l'institution de l'Union européenne qui représente les villes et régions. Je m'exprime aujourd'hui au nom de la circonscription des gouvernements locaux et autorités municipales. Grâce au volontarisme, au leadership et à l'ambition de la présidence, la COP28 a d'ores et déjà franchi une étape significative pour faire progresser les mécanismes nécessaires à la mise en œuvre d'une action climatique multiniveau, associant concrètement les échelons locaux et régionaux. En particulier, l'initiative CMP, Coalition for High Ambition Multilevel Partnerships, soutenue à ce jour par 66 pays, ainsi que la réunion ministérielle sur l'urbanisation et le changement climatique, sont des marqueurs forts, très forts, de la volonté d'inclure réellement l'échelon local et régional. Cette volonté doit maintenant être inscrite explicitement dans le texte de la décision finale de la COP28, ainsi que dans le bilan global. Il faut une référence directe à la nécessité pour les États d'associer activement et d'inclure effectivement les échelons locaux et régionaux dans l'élaboration des prochaines CDN attendues pour 2025. Nous appelons donc l'ensemble des États, en particulier les 66 signataires de l'initiative CMP, à inscrire cette exigence de manière claire et explicite dans les textes et à soutenir ainsi l'ambition de la présidence pour une action climatique multiniveau. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of trade unions, non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Benjamin Alvero, a Filipino trade unionist from the Philippines, and I speak on behalf of the workers' movement. We represent roughly 200 million workers in 337 trade unions in 167 countries, and in workplaces, communities, and streets all over the world, we continue to mobilize and organize for climate justice. While much has been done in the past few days, it is evident that many more has to be done, and the current actions as they stand are not enough, especially on the discussion on the global stocktake. We are going to the second half of COP with a document that, in the view of the workers, is not commensurate to the scale of the problem that we must collectively address. Much has gone into preparing for the global stocktake, and we believe that this energy must be channeled into concrete actions, particularly on the transition away from fossil fuels. Now is the time for transformational decisions and action, and this will only succeed if this is guided by principles of just transition. We must have a strong framework with guidance for the parties that includes considerations for social, economic, and environmental questions, as well as issues related to development, adaptation, mitigation, human rights, and other concerns. To succeed, the Just Transition Framework must have explicit references to labor rights, social dialogue, social protection, and skills development, and this must be integrated consciously into climate work if we want to seriously achieve intergenerational and international justice. Without the active participation of workers in the decision-making and in the implementation of our climate justice initiatives, then we risk failing humanity at this crucial crossroads of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your statements. I do see one final request from the floor from Nepal. Nepal, you have the floor, and try please to cap your statement to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, allow me to express my gratitude for the accomplishment over the past week, notably the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund and the announced pledges. I also commend the chairs of the subsidiary bodies and endorse the COP28 President's plan, assuring our delegation's full support for a successful COP in Dubai. Your Excellency, in the recent visit of the United Nations Secretary General to Nepal, standing at the base camp of Mountain Everest, the Secretary General emphasized the critical need for ambitious action. He called upon the world to collectively strive for a temperature rise limit to 1.5 degrees and to end of the fossil fuel era. Considering the rapid retreat of glaciers and the devastating impacts of climate catastrophe on our communities, we came to this COP with high hope and expectation to address the root cause of the climate crisis. We hope for a decisive commitment to emissions reduction in line with 1.5 degrees Celsius here in Dubai. In the remaining few days, we also have to make ambitious decisions in setting the targets on adaptation through global goal of adaptation framework and provide guidance on simplifying the access of climate finance. Please assure me delegation full support for the successful outcome. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nepal, and thank you all for your statements again. This brings us to the end of this meeting, and as you all know, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Let us approach it with the same spirit of optimism, positivity, actionism, flexibility, and inclusivity. In fact, inclusivity is what I can comfortably say has characterized this conference this far. I declare the meeting of the CMA